So I'm here probably out of survival as part of my story. I was born into a really messy situation in a really messy family. That's what was kind of assigned to me from the beginning. And so when I was born, my parents had lost a child from leukemia. They were twin children. One of them lived, the other got leukemia and passed away at 7 years old. And so that really split them up. One of my parents, the father, went into the arms of another person to console them for that time. My mother, who wasn't able to console him because she was so deep in her own grief, found out about it and went into the arms of another man to get back. That's where I came into the picture. So I'm the other man's child, but I didn't know that. Not until I was 7 years old. And I was told that while I was out swimming with a family member. His brother, in fact, my real father's brother, was swimming with me in the pool, and he revealed to me that I was his brother's son, when my whole life I had lived as this other man's son. Well, apparently there had been an agreement that they would stay married until I was born, and so they divorced 7 months after I was born, and the reason why they divorced is because he wasn't my dad. So it was messy. And so that, finding out that my entire family had kept that secret from me, I I didn't deal real well with that news. I felt like pretty much no one that I lived with could be trusted. So it really set a precedence in me of not trusting people, even people who were very close to me. And so with life being that messy, the next thing that happened that kind of shaped who I am is that I began to build a relationship with my real father. And that was going along pretty well. I was spending summers with him out at my grandparents' farm. And so everything was out and it was starting to heal and get better until one day when I was playing Little League Baseball. My sister showed up at one of my games. I was about 11, and she was there to tell me that he had been killed in an accident at work. And so this father who I just discovered I had, who I just started to really build any kind of real relationship with, was now gone. And so that led me eventually into a really dark place. I attended his funeral. There was a 21-gun salute. He was a Marine. My grandmother handed me the flag off of his coffin, and it's in my office to this day. But unfortunately, what I was left with after he died was a mother who was still in the depth of alcoholism. She had begun drinking after she had lost her child. And so I grew up in a home with an alcoholic. My legal father, she wasn't willing to commit to him because he had had an affair. My biological father, she wasn't willing to commit to him because she wasn't really in a good place to commit to anybody. And so, man, I just had a world of crazy town handed to me, and it was a lot to deal with. And so I ultimately ended up seeking the professional help of a counselor to kind of sort through my feelings about all of this, to deal with the grief, because I was in such a messy place at such a young age. And so to make matters worse, my mother's addiction, it got deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it became increasingly difficult on me. It got abusive physically, mentally, and it just wasn't healthy. And so I left home early. I went at 16 years old. I moved out of my mother's home, and I stood on my own feet. and I made my own way. And so that's where all of that took me. How I got into ministry was I'd spent the next several years building my career. I had gone to San Antonio and learned how to do real estate. I had moved back to Dallas. I was one of the youngest managers in my company. And then ultimately, it led to another career where I owned my own company. And my company was quite successful, doing really, really well financially. And I was determined that I was going to create the world I wanted to live in. So it was going to be by my standard, and it was going to be by my effort. And so I kind of was in charge. The only thing is, though, it didn't fulfill me. So no matter how much I amassed, no matter how much wealth I had, no matter how many nice vehicles and toys I had, no matter what nice house or swimming pool or how many people I had cleaning and helping and mowing, and like, it didn't matter. No matter having all of that didn't make me happy. And so I realized that I was at a real interesting place where I needed God. I was tired of being my own God. And so I went to a church because I had seen some advertisement on TV commercials saying, open hearts, open minds, open doors, the United Methodist Church. Well, that was not the church that I had experienced from my childhood. Both of my grandfathers were Baptist preachers, and they were not open hearts, doors, and minds in my experience. And so ultimately, though, I found my way to a little United Methodist church that was just getting started in my community. Met in a school cafeteria, and I'd never been to a contemporary service. And I walked in, and they were singing like these pop songs with Jesus words, and the drummer had a mohawk and earrings, and I was just like, what have they done to church? It's way cooler than I remember. And I loved it so much. And this guy asked me to bring some waters to ice down for little kids to drink and have a refreshment. And I did it for a year, and just very quietly made my way back into the life of a church. And it was about 3 years in that I started to really kind of feel a shift in me after hearing message upon message of God's grace. I started realizing that I was at a place where I wanted to do more than just learn more about Jesus. I wanted to follow Jesus. And that's when I received my calling. And so I was called into ministry, which was going to be a big deal because it was going to mean that I was going to have to, in the United Methodist Church, earn not only 1 degree, but 2 degrees to become a pastor. And yet God called me there anyway. And so I did kind of the modern version of what Peter did. I stepped out of the boat and into the unknown and tried to walk on water, and I sank plenty of times. Fast forward 9 years, I ended up with 2 degrees. And no sooner did I earn those 2 degrees than God called me and my family to Louisiana. And I will never forget getting that call. It came because the conference came to Texas and asked me to come to Louisiana. And so my first words were, I'm not going to Louisiana. And like less than a month later, I was packing to move to Louisiana. But what was interesting about all of that too is when I started saying yes to God in all this process, like God started saying yes to me. And so my family got restored. I ended up marrying a wonderful woman and my wife. I inherited a beautiful daughter in that marriage. And then we had 2 more children on top of that. And so whereas all my family stuff had been really messy and awful, it was kind of like God restored family to me in a very personal way. And so I loaded up my new little family and we came to Louisiana in answer to God's call. And that's ultimately how I ended up here at Blackwater. Yeah, I think the way that God is connecting all of this for me is that is kind of like the expectation I went into some of these past situations with, almost blaming God for that messiness instead of recognizing that it was God who was kind of navigating me through all of that messiness, that the messiness wasn't because of God and the messiness wasn't God. That God was actually the presence that was helping me kind of go, instead of giving God the credit and going, hey, God scored me a good counselor and a safe place and and some abilities, some wiring and some giftedness that allowed me to stand on my own feet and kind of, instead of, giving God credit for those things, I was more focused on the fact, well, God must not love me because God put me in this weirdo, crazy family who's torturing me and causing me harm and all of that. And so I blamed God for a lot of things that I shouldn't have. What I've learned since then is that God wasn't the source of the messiness. God was the source of the ability to endure it and to come out of it on the other side in a purposeful life, in a life that I was called to live, a life that would have much more meaning and be much more true to who God made me to be. And so, if you would have told me, back when all of this began, that this would be what would happen, I would have laughed in your face. I would have never in a million years imagined myself this way. But now I feel kind of like what God has shared with me is that we're all messy. It's like all through the Bible, like every story is one mess after another, one messy family. Jesus himself is from the messiest bloodline that you can imagine. Murderers and prostitutes and all of these different messy people and situations. And yet they're the very ones that he lifts up to show God's power over the messiness, And so I feel like I am like this, living a modern day version of these, like a continuum of these other stories that we hear when we interface with the Bible and when we talk about what it means for our lives today. And I feel like our story is very much tied to these other stories. I can see, myself and my family and our lives very woven into this. But what I also feel like I'm specifically supposed to do is kind of go, what? The church is actually for really messy people. And the expectation coming into a church should be, I'm amongst my messy people. Instead of us trying to be above that messiness, like so many churches I've experienced have been. I don't feel like I'm better than anyone else. In fact, I feel quite comfortable now just being able to be imperfect. I am the pastor of this church, but I'm not perfect. I am the pastor of this church, but I am not above anyone. I am the teacher of the word, but I don't know it all. I'm living uniquely through my lens, and you may have something that informs me on things. And so I learn constantly from our congregation and from their life experience. And I think that's the beauty, is it takes all of us to really understand the fullness of Jesus Christ, right? Because we're all part of his body. And so in order for me to know Jesus, I really have to know everyone. So in order to help people who are experiencing messiness like I have, you can respond to that in a couple of different ways. You can respond to it from a place of shame. You can respond to it from a place of bitterness or regret, and I've done both. I've done both of those things. You can respond to it from a place of just of compartmentalizing it and isolating it, or even pretending like it didn't happen when you know darn good and well it did. And I've handled it at different times in my life in all of those ways. But you know what I feel is different, what's shifted for me, and the encouragement that I have for other people is that actually you can just let that be the ashes and the devastation and the messiness that it truly is. It really can just be the kind of like sucky situation that you were dealt, and not that God was doing that to you, it's just the one that you got, you know. But you can also see that you have, that you yourself are the beauty that God is intending from that. You know, we're resurrection people. We're after Easter, right? And so we know that we're raised to new life, and God is at work doing something beautiful with you, through you, out of all of that mess. And so my 2 cents in this whole thing is just go and be your beautiful self and let your light shine and be light in someone else's life and be an encouragement for other people's lives, because I have yet to meet a single person that didn't start messy.